Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session on scaffolding to improve learning. My name is Dr. Yvonne Johnson, and I work in the Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning. I also teach doctoral level research courses for the College of Health and Human Sciences, and I've been teaching and designing various face-to-face and blended and online courses for more than 20 years. I'm excited to be here with all of you today and welcome those of you who are joining to watch the video as well. And if you could please share a little bit about yourself, and we have a small group, so you can raise your hand and turn on your microphone and share your role at NIU, what department and division you represent, and what you hope to learn from the workshop. Kelly, would you like to get us started, please?
Sure. My name's Callie, and I'm in the biology department. I'm a PhD student. I'm currently a TA, but next semester I'm going to be teaching a course at Aurora University. So excited to learn a little bit about the scaffolding learning technique.
Terrific. Great. Thank you for joining us. Chris, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. I'm Chris Goodman. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Public Administration. I teach exclusively graduate students, so I'm pretty excited to try to figure out how all of this applies to my master's students who come to us from very different backgrounds, and try to get them all into the same playing field by the end of the course.
Yes, and that's a good point, Chris. And I work in a similar environment with people who have extensive experience in working in different degrees, and they're all in the same course. So it provides a rich foundation for the learning environment and creates unique challenges and opportunities for the instructor. So great, welcome. And today we're going to be talking about scaffolding, defining it and identifying some guidelines for it. It's important to think through how you're going to scaffold a course and how you're going to scaffold that teaching and learning, and how you can integrate the scaffolding with your course design. And we'll talk about some potential challenges that might emerge when you are using the scaffolding. And when we talk about scaffolding, it's part of a social context of learning, and we're creating an environment where students and this learning community are constructing and making meaning together in the context of this course. And it involves some self-regulation of learning, and we're going to talk about different components of scaffolding and how you go about doing that. And it's important to have a systematic sequence of the content and the materials and the tasks to make sure that the learning is optimized. And then you want to support the learning process and give students the support that they need. And as Chris was saying, that students are coming in with a variety of different knowledge bases and skill levels. So you have to think through that, how you can make that an optimal learning environment for everyone, starting where they are and connecting to the information that they have. And some of those key factors of instructional scaffolding involve us as the facilitators of that learning. We're the people who are serving as mentors and guides. And part of that role involves we are not just the font of information. We want to make sure that the students are part of constructing that knowledge together, instead of depending upon the professor or instructor for all of the information. And we want to encourage students to reach a level of autonomy where they can self-regulate while we're providing support, and to help them to get to a point where they can internalize that they are constructors of knowledge, and that they have the agency to create knowledge based upon the way that we design and scaffold the course. And the scaffolding will involve some more levels of support earlier in the course, and then those scaffolds will gradually go away as students become more proficient as learners and constructing that knowledge and internalizing that they are, the professor is available for support, but the student is an integral part of this process, and they have a shared responsibility for learning. And so it's a symbiotic relationship. And there's two components to scaffolding, and one of them is modeling. And in this process, the instructor could they'll model every step of the task or the strategy as many times as necessary. And Callie was talking about biology, and I remember, in labs biology, where the instructor would go through and model every step of that process that the students are required to do, and then helping students to process that information, and then allowing students to practice it. And students can, after the instructor has modeled, then the students can practice. Maybe you start out with partners in the lab, and then maybe the students are expected to be able to do complete the task independently. But you're providing, as the facilitator of that and the support of that learning, you're providing that feedback and constructive suggestions while the students are practicing. And as the students become more proficient, then they're able to independently complete those tasks. And some simple examples of scaffolding. If you think about when you learn to ride a bike, or when you learn to do anything, someone taught you. I remember when my dad taught me how to ride a bike, he gave me this bike and he showed me how to use it. And then he said, okay, here's some tips. And you can see on the screen that in the picture on the left, there's scaffolding where there's some support. Maybe there's a person kind of guiding the child when they're learning how to ride a bike. Maybe there's some training wheels. And then over time with the practice, and then the student or the child becomes independently able to complete that task. And so you can see how those scaffolds gradually go away. You'll provide much more support and guidance in the beginning of the semester, and then the students will be expected to be more independent and proficient near the end of the semester. Okay, so if we think about your courses, we have public administration and biology as some examples. I teach research courses for people in healthcare fields. And think about, have you ever used modeling in practice to teach students a concept or strategy or process in a course that you're teaching? Or if you didn't use it in a course you're teaching, was the process of modeling and practice used in a course that you took as a student? And thinking through that process, did the scaffolding process, how it was carried out, was it effective? Or if it wasn't, what might you suggest could possibly make it better. So does anybody want to share an example of a process that they were involved in using modeling or practice and scaffolding?
Sure. So I'm currently teaching and have taught for a long time a statistics course for our MPA students, in which this is the default model, I guess. I don't really know another way to teach stats other than show how it's done in a couple of different contexts and then turn students loose to do it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And we've recently kind of moved towards a more flipped classroom where that modeling happens kind of on an individual level at home, and then a lot of the practice happens in the classroom. That seems to work a little bit better in this particular instance. I could see how that wouldn't necessarily work in other areas, but it's been reasonably successful to get students who don't really want to learn these concepts to be a little more comfortable with it, feel like they have some guardrails, and then are turned loose to explore the concept on their own.
And those are excellent points, Chris. And I know exactly what you're talking about because I teach research as well. And you sort of alluded to perhaps this is a required course that they need to take. I know mine is. And so they need these skills to be competent scholars and professionals. They might have a little bit of discomfort about the subject matter. And so that flipped classroom that you were talking about is a great example of you're sharing the information with them. They do some practicing at home and you bring them in the classroom, and then you're kind of that guide on the side as they're practicing, and you can give them constructive feedback while they're learning. And how have the students responded to that, Chris?
They certainly like it better than what it was before.
That's good. That's good.
It
Yeah,
is.
that's good.
I think it helps them feel less overwhelmed. I don't actually know if it changes the learning outcomes necessarily, but certainly our evaluations of this new approach are much better. It seems that it freaks the students out a little less to engage in that activity rather than kind of just throw it all at them and see what happens.
That's terrific. And when you talk about, we talk about learning and pedagogy and andragogy and all that. And so if the students are less nervous about, they're more calm, that's a better foundation for them to learn and retain that information for a longer period of time, because they're not using those resources for, oh my gosh, I don't know how to do this, I'm afraid of statistics or whatever. So that's terrific. I'm so happy to hear that. Great job. And then Callie, in terms of biology, is there anything that comes to mind for you as an example?
Yeah, so I've taught the TA'd for the biology 211 lab, where one of their assignments is finding primary literature. And my first semester that I taught, I didn't give them any information except for a handout on how to do it. And the assignments were pretty terrible. In the other semesters, I've started showing them, giving them examples of good scientific literature, what primary literature is. And then this past semester, I've started actually in class going on to the library website and showing them how I would search for primary literature, and then going through a couple examples and saying, okay, I'm looking for X, Y, and Z, and I found this, so I know that this is primary literature. And it seems like that's worked well. And I think in the future, I'd like to then add on, after hearing what you guys were saying, having them look in class for some of that primary literature so that I can give that direct feedback.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are great. Those are really good examples, Kelly. And then providing that direct feedback. And what you're explaining is the process of teaching and learning, throughout our entire careers. We will continue to revise and adapt our teaching processes. And one of the things you might also consider is creating a video of the research process that you should, making a screen capture video of that research process that you go through and putting it in your learning management system as a piece of information for them. Because sometimes when, there's a lot of steps in going through identifying those key terms and finding the library databases and all that kind of stuff. So if you have that video recording in your course, then it provides another level of support, because maybe, the day that you showed that in class, maybe I was tired as a student or stressed out or something. And so having that as an available resource they can look at again can also be kind of another scaffold that is available. Something maybe for you to think about. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Idea. Thank you.
Welcome. And then there are different types of scaffolding. Content scaffolding. Before we get into the types, just keep in mind that scaffolding is a deliberate process. You want to think through how you're doing it and why you're doing it, so that this teaching process that you're using of scaffolding makes sense to the students and aligns well with their levels of experience, aligns well with how you have the course content designed and things like that. Because when we use a teaching technique and design a course, we want to make sure that all of the pieces fit together nicely. Because when it makes sense to students, then they're not using cognitive load to, they're not using that cognitive energy to try to figure out, why are we doing this? Why did she have me do this and that in that order? It doesn't make any sense to me. So think about why you're doing it and how you're doing it, why it makes sense with your course. So one type of scaffolding is content scaffolding. And Chris was talking about, you have students who have different levels of experience and expertise. They likely come from different disciplinary backgrounds. So they're coming to the table starting with the foundation of different levels of expertise. So what you could do is do some sort of a survey a little bit before the course starts, or right away in that first week, to get an idea of where they are in terms of knowledge level related to the content that you're teaching. Because when you're content scaffolding, you want to be able to connect what you're teaching in the class to the level of knowledge that the students have. And so one thing that you might do is, if your course is master's level, let's say, and so they're expected to be at a certain level of knowledge and independence. So if you have somebody coming from a discipline and maybe they have zero knowledge of statistics, let's say, so they might need more foundational content. So you might provide some of that in the Blackboard learning management system as resources, because you don't want to start everyone off at that very basic level, because it's a master's level course and they're expected to be at a certain point when they start the course. So you're still scaffolding, but some of that information is scaffolded by being built into the learning management system. And so you start with the content that's appropriate for the level of your course, and then you help students. You can ask them questions and you can help them to connect their knowledge and experience with the content that you're talking about. And sounds like we all teach research in different ways, but everybody on this earth uses research in different ways. But what I do is I'll ask students some sort of open-ended questions to prompt them. Okay, did you do any exploration when you were they were looking for a smartphone, maybe for a car, for a computer, things like that. And so they start to see that, oh yes, I do research, I collect statistics, things like that. And then how are you going to use that for the context of public administration? And so you want to help them make those connections. And then, as Chris said, then they're going to be more comfortable learning with that content. And then you're serving as that guide on the side as you build the complexity of that content that your course focuses on, while students are starting by connecting it with something that they already have knowledge of. And that will help them to remember and retain information as well, because anytime students can connect information with something they already know, then they're going to be able to recall that better and make more complex connections. You can also do task scaffolding. And so that's when you're outlining those steps of the process and modeling it. And we do that a lot in labs. Chris was talking about you do it with statistics, how they have to go through these different statistical analyses. And I do it with research. One of the things that students need to complete in my course is a dissertation research proposal. And so, we'll build those different parts of the proposal and scaffold. And at the end, after I've provided that constructive support, they eventually come up with a dissertation proposal. You might also do material scaffolding. And so some things that you can do in material scaffolding is you can use prompts to help students draw out information that they know. I do this a lot. I'll use open-ended templates that have a few prompts on them that ask students to think about what they've conducted research on in the past, or how could possibly use interviews in their life to collect data and learn about certain content areas, things like that. And open-ended prompts is one way to do that. Another way to do material scaffolding is you want to know how students understand the information that you're discussing in class. And, people think in different ways. There's some debate about different types of learners and things like that. But people, like for myself, if I see a depiction of something, perhaps a statistical representation, some sort of visual representation of statistical data, then that helps me to understand it better. So one of the things I do sometimes is I'll use concept maps, and I'll have students, I might share a concept map that shows the different steps in the process of research, or I might ask them to create a concept map that visually represents their learning. And so that's a different way to gain information from them, to see how are they connecting these complex concepts that you're discussing in class. Oftentimes people will say, write up a paper or and answer these questions. But asking them to create a concept map is a way that they can visually demonstrate their learning to you. It's also a way that you can scaffold information to them by sharing it in a different way. And using visual representations can also help to break down some of the complexity, because you can use arrows and lines and dashes and different things to show connections between those different complex parts of something that you're teaching. And when you're scaffolding, you want to make sure that you use a deliberate instructional technique. So you first would introduce the concepts, and then you use this technique by think about when it makes sense to use this technique. You might not always need to use the scaffolding technique, but I use it most of the time for very complex content that involves a lot of different steps. Or it might just be really complex content. It doesn't have a lot of steps, but it's just really complex in how all the information fits together. So use it as needed. Think carefully about when does it make sense. And then offer the students opportunities to discuss together. You're building in that social connection between and among the students, which is important because, we teach these high-level courses and content that is often best discussed with other people to kind of clarify those parts of it that we're not quite clear about. You're providing that guide on the side going around the class, or if you're teaching online, providing those suggestions online, but make sure that you have opportunities for them to discuss together. You're there to provide support. You might have teaching assistants to provide support. You can have peer support, and it should be interactive. And so when Chris was talking about that flipped classroom, that's great. The students were at home practicing this, getting that introduction to the information. And then, these are complex formulas that they need to complete and be able to explain what this information means. So then in the classroom, when they're physically together or virtually together, then that's when you do that guide on the side and providing that additional support and clarification. And scaffolding is a really important way to support the students' learning. You're stopping by, you're asking them questions, as opposed to spewing out extensive amounts of information. You could share, like Chris said, have it available in the LMS, have them work on it, and then bring them to class. So you're going through, and this is a way that you can help students who are at different levels of knowledge and experience with the content. Is, they worked on it at home. You go around the class when they're working on it in class. And so you can say, okay, Yvonne, you really need, you have some questions about this part of it, so I'm going to help you with that. Okay, then Kelly has questions about a different aspect of it. And so it provides students the different types of support that they need, instead of sharing exactly the same information in front of the whole class. And maybe that's beyond my expertise level that I'm at that point, or maybe I need additional challenges, which you can do when you're providing that guide on the side support. And then you're trying to get the students to the point where they can do it alone. Okay, so as I said, you don't always use scaffolding. So you want to think about, is it appropriate to use? Why would you use it? How would you use it? It needs to make sense in the larger framework of your teaching, how you have the course designed. But anytime a teaching technique is used that might be a little different, I always explicitly explain it to students why I'm using this. Because to us as experts with the content and with the teaching, it might seem perfectly obvious why we're doing it this way. But think about when you were first being introduced to some complex material. And sometimes that's hard when we are steeped in our disciplines. It can be difficult to think about when you first learned this content, what was that like? So what I'll do is, and I use a lot of different teaching techniques, and I explain to students why I'm using that. Why am I chunking this up? Why are we practicing this? Why am I giving you this information to work on at home, and then you're coming to the class, and then we're addressing the questions that you have. And I explain that it allows people to start where they are at their different levels of knowledge with the content, allows me and the students to get that individualized support and attention that they need, and explain how it's going to be done. And for instance, as Chris was saying, if you're using a flipped classroom, need to explain why is it important that they actually do this reading and that they do these computations before they come to class, so that you can provide them specific individualized support, because otherwise people might not do that work before class, and then it's not as constructive of a learning environment. And you want to also build in opportunities for when you have the class together, let students raise these unique challenges that they have. And what we always find is that rarely is it a unique challenge. A lot of people in the class have probably gone through that similar confusion, or they're not clear on a certain part of the content. And so that helps students to see, it's a part of scaffolding, because it helps students to see that, oh my gosh, everyone in this class, it's not like we just became experts in this complex content. It took a lot of work. We had to study and get the concepts in our mind. We had to get the formulas in our mind. We had to learn the research process through the online databases. We had to learn what's acceptable as a peer-reviewed scholarly article. And, it took modeling and practice and continued practice. And when students find out that that other students are having the same problems, it helps them to feel more comfortable in the class as well. And they become more independent. They start to defer to each other to support their learning as well. And when you're scaffolding in the class, think about different ways that you can help to motivate the students. Decide what you're going to scaffold and what you're not going to scaffold. You need to make sure that how you design this project to scaffold is manageable for you and the students. And then make adjustments, as Callie was saying. we've taught this particular research process. And so each time you think about, okay, what worked well, what might I tweak and do a little bit differently next time. And so you're scaffolding your teaching processes for yourself as well. And when you're thinking about scaffolding, it's important to consider the level of difficulty that you are starting with. And it can be tricky, but if you start at too complex of a level, then students may say, oh man, there's no way I can learn this. I don't even know where to start. If you start at too basic of a level, then they may be bored. But if you try to get that spot where you're going to capture as many of the students level, start where as many of the students are as possible, and then build from there, then that's going to be the most productive learning environment. And so you can build those other scaffolds. Like I said, if there's some foundational information, you can build that into the LMS and have it available. Let students know, okay, if this is, if you're not as knowledgeable about this, you can refer to the LMS for additional resources. And I often have, I have students from the whole spectrum, from relatively kind of new to qualitative research, to have some experience, to some have more experience. And so I'll also build in more complex challenges for the students who really want to kind of go to the next level as well. And so that's kind of a differentiated instruction type of way to scaffold. And it works well with a group that has a lot of experience, but they might have different knowledge levels because they're coming from different disciplines or something like that. And one of the things that's important for students to know in the scaffolding is that you're going to be providing them constructive feedback. So you're monitoring their progress, and let them know that, this is the process of learning, that they're not going to go from beginning level of knowledge about this complex content or these complex formulas or research process. They're not going to go from entry level knowledge to doctoral level of knowledge in a semester. It's a process that they have to keep working at. And so you're a supportive person as well, helping them to self-regulate. And what can help them to self-regulate is if you ask them questions. And so if they say, I really struggled with this part of the assignment, you start to ask them those, well, how did you handle it? Did you look at this resource? Did you look at this? Did you practice these calculations? And then based upon that, the student can gain insights about, okay, I need to practice the calculations more. I know for me, thinking back to, advanced math and things, I just had to practice more. And once you do those processes and calculations over and over, then maybe I didn't have to do the next ones as often. But it's important that the student gets to where they take your feedback and adapt their self-regulation to eventually become independent learners with this content, and to where the scaffolds are not needed anymore. But for that to work, you need to be really encouraging and build in that, errors are part of the process. when we try new things, we make mistakes. We might fail, but we learn from that and then continue to move forward. We want to build in that growth mindset, which scaffolding does support very well, where it encourages lets students know that they can develop expertise in new areas. They have to work at it, and you as the professor are going to support that. We don't want an environment where they don't feel supported and will retreat instead of continuing to try to work through those challenges. And so over the semester, when you're deciding how scaffolding will be used, you want to make sure that you think about how much support and what kind of resources are you going to provide at the beginning of the semester, and then gradually over time, what makes sense to take those away. And maybe you build in some opportunities for students to work with other students. We talked about that social aspect. And so they start to work together and support each other, and they're gradually reducing independence on you, gradually reducing dependence upon you, and then gradually becoming more independent. And sometimes when students ask questions of other students, they might feel more comfortable expressing their confusion about a certain concept to other students. And sometimes other students can explain it in a way that is other students might accept more, or it might be simpler because the other students are more at the same level of understanding. And then creating and sustaining a culture of thoughtfulness is really important. That we talk a lot about critical thinking and how important that is to learning, and to initially get students to really be thoughtful and ask questions. You might use some open-ended prompts, but as the course goes on, you would expect them to come up with their own questions, hopefully, and discuss at a complex level what you're teaching in the class. And that will begin to emerge when you've created a welcoming and supportive learning environment, and students feel that it's okay for them to say they don't know, it's okay for them to question, and support each other. So that'll be something that comes out in the as the course goes on. And then when thinking about the scaffolding, think about the different components of the course. So there's the instructor, there's the class, there's groups, there's individuals. And as the instructor, you're going to model the process. You're going to model the maybe it's a lab that you're showing, or then have them practice in the class. What are you going to do in the class, and why are you going to do it, and how are you going to do that? Think about that and plan it. And then as a group, what makes sense for them to do as a group, and what doesn't make sense for them to do as a group? What are they going to have to be able to do on their own? And then individually. So what I'll do in my research proposal course is I will have some group assignments where they will wrestle with these complex topics. I'll provide resources in the LMS. We'll have some lectures and interaction, and as a whole class, we'll discuss, but then have small groups to kind of get into more depth, and they become areas for them to build information and construct knowledge together. And then eventually the students will create their own research proposal and submit that. And they've also built in, there's a support system, so they feel like they can ask each other questions as well. So when you're teaching biology or research or public administration, what do you think are some unique challenges to scaffolding learning that might happen in your courses?
I guess for me, for next semester for this class, it'll be the first time I'm teaching it. So knowing
Yep.
where to start and how to make it basic, but not too basic, will be an interesting challenge.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that you can think about is when you as a student took that class, consider how it was taught when you took it, and how you might adapt that. But yes, that's a good point. And always know that, we make our best decision, and then you're going to be adapting. But if you do some kind of a survey of their knowledge, either just before the course starts or right away in that first week, then that can help guide you in terms of what level of complexity the students can handle at the beginning and then as you scaffold through the course. So if you want, some examples of maybe a survey that you could use, I could send you one if you would like that.
Sure, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, yep. Okay.
No, and
Okay.
that concept of a survey at the beginning is something that we've recently adopted, not necessarily for the purposes of what we're talking about here, but to demonstrate to the students that they are learning.
Mhm.
So one of the things that we've identified is that because it's a complicated topic, they have a hard time recognizing where they are at the beginning and where they end up at the end. So
Mhm.
we ask them explicitly now where they are at the beginning, or they feel like they are, and then we ask them the same questions again at the end of the course, and then give the information back to them and say, "Look, you learned, or at least you think you learned," um, and that's helpful for us in planning because now we have that baseline, or at least we have some decent data on kind of what that average baseline is, so we can start to tailor the course a little bit more.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great example of it it seems simple, but it's very powerful because like you said, how many times did I don't know if either of you have children, but I would ask my daughter, "Oh, what'd you learn in school?" "Oh, I didn't learn anything." Well, then you start asking them, "Yes, you did. Look at all the things." And so that technique, Chris, is very powerful because they are they're getting that insight from themselves rather than us as the professor or the institution saying, "This is what you learned in the course." You're asking them and they're saying, "Yes, I learned this and I learned this." And that's powerful. And yeah, like you said, it does help for the department to continue refining the curriculum and things like that. Yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you. And some of the challenges and caveats related to scaffolding, like we had talked about, you need to have information about the students their level of knowledge about the content, and that can be hard if you're in a program where you've had students before. That's easier because you have some connection with them. But if it's kind of one of those courses that they take and then they go on to other courses and you don't have the ongoing connection, it can be a little harder. But think about where they should be, and what are the expectations for accreditation and things like that that they need to be at when they're finished with the course, and then build from there. Another thing that you can do is, there are misconceptions about all of our disciplines and different areas of content. And so if you're aware of what those common misconceptions are, then you can address those directly and provide peer-reviewed research for it and things like that. And so that can break down some challenges that students have when they're trying to correctly learn information. If there's a common misconception, for instance, I teach qualitative research, and there might be a misconception that that's not rigorous research. And so, I'll show these, the years and years and years of qualitative research, and the rigor that have been developed and all this. And so sort of heading off those misconceptions can help with the scaffolding, because if you don't, then students may be hung up on that and they might not correctly learn the information because they have a misconception. And just be thoughtful about how you construct the scaffolding, because you want to make sure that it's a practical process for you as the instructor and for the students, and it makes sense. And like I said, I just directly explain that to the students, and so then if they have questions about it, I explain it, and then when they understand that process, they're more likely to roll up their sleeves and really get in and learn. And when you start using the scaffolding, you'll need to be thoughtful about, how is this working? What I'll do is I'll have maybe I'll have a draft of my plan for the scaffolding, and then jot notes on it. Say, okay, I started at this level of complexity. It seemed to fit for this group, but then I taught it again. And, there were a few people who it just really didn't work for, and why. And so then you continue to build your resources so that you can meet the unique learner's needs. And if you're teaching large classes, you might need to scaffold to groups, because you just need to be able to use practical approaches, because you wouldn't be able to go around to individual, couple hundred individual students. And you can provide information in different formats. I've talked to professors who said that students have requested, maybe they request an audio format or a video format or whatever. I've had students say, I'm listening to this when I'm on the treadmill or whatever. So if you can provide it in some sort of a multimedia format, then that can help me. So as you continue to build your resources when teaching classes, you can add those additional. Okay, thank you, Kelly. You can add those additional options. Okay, and then you want to be attentive to the gains that students are making. And that's what Chris was talking about. You're talking about in terms of, where were they at the beginning of the semester and where are they at the end of the semester? And that's important, because then if that scaffolding process was effective in terms of the assessments and where the students are going. and be positive about the process and encourage when you speak positively about the process and about students when they're confused about something or struggling with something, then it helps the students to have more of that growth mindset and be accepting that it's learning can involve a lot of challenges, and that's how we grow. And so summarizing, the students need to be aware of their strengths and the tasks that they're going to complete. And, if there's something that is required for them to reach competence that they're not as good at, they're going to have to put in more effort. And let them know that, by the end of the class, this level of support will be available. They need different levels of challenges, and make sure that, if they do quote unquote fail, then okay, let's use this as a learning experience, and how can we grow from this and move forward, because we all make mistakes, and failure is just part of moving through that learning process. And build in that constructive, supportive network of students supporting each other. And practice is important. They can't just practice it once and become proficient. And then they'll be expected to demonstrate. In some way, they need to make their learning visible. So you scaffold them through this process. Maybe they have to be able to show some complex calculations of statistics, or they need to be able to show a visual representation of the data they collected and to be able to explain that. And so they've gone from you providing a lot of support to being able to show, yes, I can complete these calculations, I can do these lab experiments, I can conduct this research, and here's how I'm going to visually show you that I understand that, and that I've done it and I've mastered it, and that I can be more independent with that. And then I have some different resources, and just want to remind everyone that the Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning is always available for support, and you can get a hold of us, and we provide teaching and learning support for faculty and instructors and staff, and we also provide Blackboard support, Kaltura support, a lot of other things. So we're happy to help you. So if there's anything that you want to share, Chris, go ahead. Let me know. Do you have any questions? I will send the survey that I was talking about. I'll send an example of a survey that you can use to collect information from students at the beginning of a course, and then you can see it has a different purpose than the one that you were talking about, but it's good to have different examples. So is there anything else that you would like to share or discuss at this time?